Hey all, so back with another Spotlight with Context, and today we are talking about Dracula. That's right, Dracula's a Marvel character, if you didn't already know. Good old public domain. Anyway, getting right into the attributes for this particular vampire, survivability of 3.5. Dracula has access to some really solid healing, but there is some skill required in getting it. And he can just be hit, right? He doesn't have a ton of defenses against incoming damage, but he is good at recovering it. Averages out to about a 3.5 here. Damage of 4, again, we're going to get to the ease of use in a second. You have to work for it. It's not going to be immediately apparent when you first start using Dracula, but when you get good with him, and especially in his target matchups, but mainly just when you get good with him, the damage here is really good. It's almost entirely degeneration with a little bit of bleed. All of that is direct damage. It's not subject to energy or physical resistance. The degen itself is not subject to weakness, so you don't have to worry about inequity or anything like that because it scales with base attack. The damage is good and very reliable. Like we talked about already, ease of use is pretty low, though. Dracula is definitely a character that's not going to be for everyone. If you're used to some other characters that like this kind of interrupt, and I say interrupt, not intercept, style, then he might feel familiar to you. There are some similarities to Kitty Pryde, to Moondragon, to Absorbing Man. A bunch of fun characters. But they are hard to use, right? Like, to get good results out of Dracula, you basically need to do these finicky things. And so if you can, incredibly powerful. But I say this not to talk anybody out of him. I encourage you to try it. He has good tools for it to support that playstyle. But simply to warn you that yes, he is cool. Yes, he is powerful. If you pull him, you might not want to immediately take him all the way up. Make sure you put in a little bit of practice before pulling that particular trigger. Utility of 4, Dracula is very good at getting extra openings. He has some nice nullify. He has mainly 2 real control abilities in his slow and his fear, but they're passive and they have very, very good uptime, so he gets quite a bit of credit for them. And then lastly, Defender Strength of 2. He can cause miss on defense. That can be pretty tricky. You have to be careful playing around parrying him. The special attack animations are kind of tough. But for the most part, he's not really a terrible defender because the degen that he inflicts doesn't exist on defense. I would make sure you understand his kit a little bit, though, because there are some interactions with nullify and that kind of stuff, so Dracula could be pretty easily amplified with nodes. I actually don't remember what his EQ fight looks like, but I imagine there's some of that. So, yeah, don't just run in without reading a little bit. So, speaking of reading, let's get into the abilities. First up, we have Blood of Vampires. Dracula is immune to heal block, but has reduced regeneration rate when fighting silver champions. There aren't a lot of them, but there are a few. Most of them are given away by the name. Just be careful with it. Generally, this just means immune to heal block. And then Dracula also only gets half of Mystic Dispersion. Whatever rank you have, he only gets half of the normal amount. But after a buff on the opponent is nullified, he inflicts a bleed passive for 3 seconds. That after will matter later, but generally this means that you want nullifies because it means you're going to get more damage. And like I said earlier, be careful if you're fighting Dracula on defense. He doesn't have a lot of defensive nullify triggers, but you might want a bleed immune depending on what else is going on in the fight. Next up, this is the star of the show, the Dire Degeneration. As an attacker at the start of the fight, Dracula inflicts a degen passive dealing an absurd amount of damage over an absurd amount of time. This is unaffected by ability accuracy and scales with base attack only. But this looks like it does a bunch of damage, and it does, but the actual per tick amount of this degen is pretty low. And that's Dracula's whole gimmick, right? Because the idea of this kit is that you want to make that degen dire and speed up its tick rate so that that small tick happens more often and you get more damage out of this degen without needing to wait the full 600 seconds, right? Now, the way you do that is either by charging a heavy attack or interrupting any attack with a light attack. Like we said earlier, this is similar to Moondragon or Absorbing Man because it does say interrupting with a light. You do not have to intercept, right? You just have to land that light attack while the opponent is in an attack animation. That can be at the beginning of it, such as if you're intercepting them. It can be in the middle of it, like with a heavy attack. It can also be at the end of it. So you can punish a heavy with a light and turn this dire degen on. You can also punish a combo ender into your own block or a whiff. You can punish the opponent trying to hit you when they miss. Like, there's a bunch of different ways to use this. Again, the key is just to remember that interrupting means hitting them with a light while they're in some kind of attacking animation. And then that increases the tick rate here by 666%. So obviously that's a very flavorful number, but some quick math, normally damaging effects in general tick twice per second. Increasing this by 666% means that you are getting 13 more ticks each second, right? Instead of 2, you're going to get 15 and change. But generally, that's how much extra damage you are getting. You're probably not going to be able to visually track that, but you're going to notice it on your opponent's health bar. And I think it is kind of helpful just reminding yourself that you want the dire degen because it's effectively meaning that you're doing 7.5 times as much damage. The degen remains dire as long as Dracula continues attacking or while a striker or striker opening are active. So that means that you want to start your combos with these lights and string them on as long as you possibly can, right? Using a striker to extend them, comboing into a special, or you want to use your heavy and then cancel it into a special so that the degen is dire at the start of the special and then persists throughout it. Now, like we said, that can be kind of difficult, but Dracula does have some nice tools to help you with this gameplay. And the most important of these is the form of mist. So hitting into the opponent's block with a basic attack grants Dracula an invisibility buff for 2 seconds. This will not re-trigger while active, but it doesn't have to be your medium, it doesn't have to be your first light, it can truly be any basic attack. It just won't re-trigger, and that can matter sometimes, because that can mean that you can hit into the opponent's block, maybe they don't attack you during it, and you keep hitting into their block. Maybe you're slow playing it a little bit, and your like third or fourth light, or even your medium 2 hits their block, right? Normally a combo would be over and you would get punished, but if the invisibility has gone away and then you reactivate it with that combo ender into their block, they're probably going to hit into you, and then you can hit them with a light and punish it, right? That will count as an interrupt, and you've still gotten your dire. If the invisibility causes an attack to miss, or if Dracula is struck while it's active by somebody who can counter miss, it goes on cooldown for 12 seconds when it ends. But, kind of like I was just talking about with the previous bullet, if you don't cause miss, then you're not punished for it, and you can immediately reactivate it if you need to. Next up we have Vampiric Drain. This is the regen. During his specials, Dracula gains a regen passive, healing a small amount of max health per second, but the tick rate of this regen is increased by half of the dire degeneration's increased tick rate. So we said earlier that dire degen effectively increases the damage by 7.5 times, so you're going to get a little bit more than 3 times the healing when it's dire than when it's not. You want that to be dire because that will be a pretty significant boost to your overall sustain. Additionally, each sword hit in the specials, so pay attention to their animations, nullifies a buff on the opponent. If a Fury buff specifically is nullified, then Dracula steals it to gain a Fury buff with twice that potency. Now, that can only be up to a limit. These Furies aren't going to get insanely large, but it does mean that if you're stealing small Furies, you're still getting a real kick out of them. But these Furies only last until the end of the special attack and then go away. As a reminder, Dracula's degen potency is already locked in and scales with base attack anyway, so these Furies aren't helping that, but they are making your hits of the specials bigger, and because the Fury happens right away and the bleed that Dracula gets for nullifying a buff happens after the nullify, those bleeds are going to benefit from the Fury. So you still want to chase this where you can because it is going to mean more damage. On to the special 1. The only thing this does is on activation it inflicts a slow passive for 40 seconds. It also has 6 sword hits in it, so it's a very good vehicle for your nullify, and it has a decently long duration, so even if you're not getting much out of it, it can be good to throw it while your degen is dire to stretch that degen out as long as you possibly can. That said, if the fight is going the way you want it to, then you're probably going to want to be throwing the special 2, because if you don't need the slow, if you don't need the nullify, the special 2 automatically makes the degen dire, and if it was already dire, it increases it all the way to 1200%. So that's going to be even more damage, but also even more healing. If you throw the special 2 while the degen is already dire, you're going to see your health bar go up pretty dramatically and your opponent's go down pretty dramatically. And this also has a good amount of duration to it. So like I said, this is going to be your default if the fight allows. Sometimes you got to throw the special 1, but that's also why the slow passive is so long, so that unless you need just a ton of nullifies, you can throw the special 1 and then enjoy the special 2 for a little bit before looping back. The special 2 animation does have sword hits, but fewer. It also has bat hits per this second bullet, and those inflict a fear passive for 60 seconds, and these can be inflicted through block. So if there's a scary unblockable coming up and you have to throw this into block, you can. You can even charge heavy before you throw this, and that'll work, right? Like, that'll send the degen dire, you'll throw the special 2, it'll apply the fear through block, you'll turn off unblockables, you'll get the increased tick rate for the degen and for the regen. You might get hit after it, but it's worth noting that you can do it. The other thing about this fear passive is that if you were hoping to go unblockable against Dracula, then you want to make sure you don't block the special 2. Now, another important note here is that special attacks have a defined duration if you let them play out. But there's a window before the end of that animation where you're allowed to take control of your character and do something else, right? This is most apparent with characters like Professor X or Cassandra Nova, where you are allowed to take action long before the animation finishes on its own, because that's how they use their channeling mechanic, right? But that is technically true for every champion in the game. That's important for Dracula because the degen will stay dire until you leave the special attack animation. So the special 2 has a bit of time after it. If you don't have to block or dodge immediately, you shouldn't, because you'll hold on to that super degen and that really strong regen until the second you do. And so really try and stretch that out as long as you can. Now, the special 3, this is mostly a reset. If you're in a really long fight and you actually use up the massive duration of Dracula's degen, then you'll want to re-inflict it with the special 3. And it will also get you back into the fight by inflicting a power steal passive that steals a bar of power over 3 seconds. So you'll pretty quickly get back up to your special 1 and be able to turn that degen dire. This also functions as a finishing move because at the end of the attack it inflicts a strong bleed passive that can get up to 1260% stronger, and that's base potency. So before any bleed vulnerabilities or resistances or anything. Depending on how far the opponent is below 30% of their health. So if you throw the special 3, let's say at 35% health, and it does enough damage to take the opponent down to 20% health, then you're going to get credit on this bleed potency for them being at 20% health. That's why it says at the end of this. And that bleed can get really chunky. It's only 3 seconds. It's a passive. It's a very good finisher if you can plan around it. Takes some experimentation though, and I do think that the special 2 is going to be what you go for most of the time, but it's a nice little move. On to the signature ability, Prince of Darkness. As an attacker, when the opponent's unblockable, unstoppable, or evade effects, so that's the things that fear and slow cause to fail due to reduced ability accuracy, inflict a bleed passive for 3 seconds. So basically you're just getting credit for stopping these effects, similar to if you had nullified them. It's not exactly the same potency. At max sig, this is stronger, but it's similarly a short, potent bleed when you are chasing these matchups that you want to be chasing. And then the second bullet here, Dracula gains extra attack rating for each armor break debuff he's suffering from, up to 5. He doesn't place any armor ups on himself, he doesn't place any armor breaks on himself, but there are nodes that do this, there are cosmic defenders that do this, and Dracula is going to hit harder against those. Again, this attack rating will not benefit his degen, but it will benefit his bleeds and it will benefit his actual attacks. So, still worth going out of your way for. So before we move on to synergies, let's take a look at the champion summary. As a reminder, at the start of the fight, he inflicts a degen that just lasts a really long time. You can charge a heavy to make this dire, causing it to deal damage faster. You can also interrupt the opponent's attacks with a light to make it dire, and it will stay dire as long as you keep attacking. You can hit the opponent's block to turn invisible, which feeds into that previous one. The special 1 inflicts slow and has a bunch of nullify triggers. The special 2 inflicts fear and automatically makes the degen dire. Defender summary, if a buff on the attacker is nullified, Dracula inflicts bleed. If he's blocked, such as when you try to parry, he turns invisible. Special 1 inflicts slow, special 2 inflicts fear. So pretty simple, and like I said, not a major defender, but there's not a ton of individual abilities in the attacker kit, but the nuance of how they come together and how you will use them is pretty deep. So like I said, if Dracula is exciting you, then good, he should. He's awesome. But just make sure you set aside some time to get used to him. So on to our synergies. First up, we have Vampiric, the Vampire Kingdom comics event, for those of you who don't know. But this is with Blade, Morbius, Joaquin Torres, Storm, Jubilee, and Black Panther. It's a big event. For Dracula, at the start of the fight, he gains 25% of a bar of power for each other unique synergy champion present, so that can be up to a full bar. For synergy champions, including Dracula, but also all the others, interrupting any attack inflicts a bleed debuff over 8 seconds. This is a debuff, so it benefits from deep wounds. This is also particularly nice for Morbius and Black Panther because they like going for intercepts and they care about how many bleeds are on the opponent. Joaquin Torres is better at going for intercepts than most champions because of the AI manipulation he has. Debuffs are good for Jubilee because they are purify triggers. And then Storm likes, heavy countering. It's probably the worst for her, honestly, but it's still free damage, and that's generally good. And then for specifically Storm, Jubilee, and Black Panther, when fighting a silver champion, they suffer a reduced regeneration rate, and that is a lore nod to them becoming vampires in this comics event, right? Spoilers. You big nerd, synergy with Moon Knight that everybody wanted to be here. Enjoy the meme. For Dracula, personal bleeds get extra potency, and under the light of the full moon, they get even more. For Moon Knight, if the real world moon is full or new, it's considered to be both full and new. And if it's waxing or waning, it's considered to be both. So you get more benefits out of the kit from this. This also combos really well with Mr. Knight's synergy with Moon Knight. Children of the Night with Werewolf by Night. For Dracula, gaining his personal invisibility grants the opponent a non-stacking Fury buff for 15 seconds. So this can work against you because that Fury has a potency. If they hit you, bad things will happen. But it also means that you can nullify it and steal it at double potency. So worth going for. And then for Werewolf, the Chilling Howl grants a Fury passive for 20 seconds. So those ruptures can get even bigger. Horrible Cursed Night with Annihilus, Medusa, Apocalypse, Frankencastle, and Archangel. You get a bunch of different bonuses here. Annihilus gets extra special damage. Medusa gets combat adrenaline, meaning that if she is struck, she gains more adrenaline that she can then convert back. Apocalypse gets extra armor, making him even tankier. Frankencastle gets extra attack. Archangel gets extra critical rating, which is beautiful because it gives him more access to bleeds. And then Dracula gains the bonuses of everybody else who's here. So everything we just said, Dracula can have access to if he has a full team. Obviously -1 because team size of 5, but really powerful synergy for him potentially. Noble Lords with Count Nefaria, Zemo, and Mordo. All of them gain extra combat power rate. And then up to bat with Massacre, bat attacks gain extra critical rating. Get it? Because sometimes it's a baseball bat, sometimes it's a flying rodent. You get it. I like it. Anyway, and then to touch on the incoming synergy bonuses, we already knew this was there. A debt is owed from Mr. Knight. The Dracula side of this is that when the opponent's unblockable, unstoppable, or evade effects fail due to reduced ability accuracy, he also pauses his fear and slows. So if he's duped, you're already inflicting bleeds. Now, whether or not he's duped, you're also getting better uptime on your effects for doing this. The incoming synergy from Carolina Dean, Canine Teeth in the Side of My Neck. Dracula has, when inflicted with an Incinerate effect, lower the potency of future Incinerates by 15%, up to 75%. Probably not going to actively hunt Incinerate fights with this, but still a nice benefit. And then lastly, Pride on Nico. This is a generic synergy already, but Dracula's the missing piece with it, and it just gives all champions arm rating, block proficiency, energy resist, and physical resist. And this is because Dracula in Marvel canon, like the rest of these characters, is bi. Fun fact. So yeah, that's Dracula. He's a lot of fun, like I said. It's a really unique playstyle that I encourage you to try out and go for. The rewards are significant. You get a bunch of degen and a bunch of regen, and you feel like a vampire who just kind of has control over the fight and is beating down your weaker opponent. That said, I know he's not going to be for everybody, but I hope you at least found this interesting. Let me know in the comments what you're thinking, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and take care.